Welcome to Block Time. So over the last few years, we've seen a number of issues affecting the evolution and development of some of the blockchain networks. I think the one that everyone is aware of is the Bitcoin scaling issue. But this certainly isn't limited to scaling, and it's certainly not limited to Bitcoin as well. Ethereum, many of the other blockchains out there that are on the market today are all facing very similar issues when it comes to scaling. Many people see this as a technology issue, but it's not. And I'm going to explain why that's the case. Taking scaling as an example, this is related to the block size. In simple terms, each block on the blockchain is a certain size, and that size can accommodate a certain number of transactions. When there are too many transactions to fit in a block, the miners who mine these blocks prioritize the transactions that are paying the highest transaction fees. Simple economics. This is what's driving the huge rise in Bitcoin transaction fees from a few years ago when a Bitcoin transaction was a few cents to today where if you want to create a Bitcoin transaction, you're paying in a range of $40 per transaction. Clearly something that's not sustainable for the network. So how do we fix this? Well, the simple solution is to increase the block size. The larger the block size, the more transactions that can fit in each block, and therefore the less competition there is to get your transaction into a block, the cheaper the transaction fees will be. Simple. And in fact, this change is just one line of code in the Bitcoin code base and was proposed to the Bitcoin network over 2 years ago when this first became an issue. So if it's such a simple fix, why hasn't it been adopted? This is where governance comes in, and what we'll see is that the governance of the network is actually much more important than the technology of the network itself. Now, the Bitcoin community is very divided on what the best solution to scaling is. Increasing the block size sounds like a simple concept, but there's a lot of turmoil within the community about whether this change should be adopted or not. The biggest problem is that for a change to be adopted by the Bitcoin network, all of the miners, or certainly the vast majority of the miners on the network, have to adopt and implement that change. But the miners don't want to see an increased block size. To understand why this is the case, we need to look at what the incentives are that drive the miners. To mine Bitcoin, you have to buy very expensive computer equipment, what we call ASICs. It's customized hardware that's specifically designed to mine certain types of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular. This hardware can set you back anywhere from tens of thousands to millions of dollars. It's very expensive. When you start operating these machines, you want to maximize your revenues and your returns. You've made a large investment into the hardware, you need to pay back that investment, and you want to maximize how much money you're making from mining. Also bear in mind that because you're paying back this large investment, it's unlikely that you're actually keeping any of the Bitcoin you're mining. Typically, these mining operations have invested huge amounts of money, plus they have ongoing bills to pay. Electricity is very expensive when it comes to mining. So all of the Bitcoin that's being mined is being converted back into dollars to pay for those bills, to pay back that investment. Typically the miners are not ending up accumulating a large amount of the cryptocurrency that they're mining. Importantly as well, ASIC miners don't just mine Bitcoin, they mine a range of cryptocurrencies, and those miners will mine whatever is the most profitable. So if Bitcoin becomes less profitable, then they will go and mine something else. So again, changes to the Bitcoin network that could affect the profitability for miners could mean that the Bitcoin network also loses the support of those miners because they'll go and mine another cryptocurrency that's more profitable for them. So the core issue of the Bitcoin network is that the entities that control what changes are made to the network are not incentivized by the success and growth of the network itself. They're incentivized by maximizing the profits that they're making from mining equipment, from hardware that they've invested in that ultimately could mine a number of different cryptocurrencies. On top of this, Bitcoin does not have strong governance. If we look at large successful decentralized projects, think Linux, think the Apache Foundation, these are very mature and developed corporate entities that are well funded and mandated to promote the development and adoption of their core products. Bitcoin and most of the cryptocurrencies out there do not have this strong governance structure that would typically support a large, open, and decentralized project. Now, these divides are the cause of many of the forks that we've seen in the Bitcoin network. Now, a fork is where we've seen a split and divide in the community, and essentially part of the community has split off, adopted a change, taken some of the miners with it, and rolled out a new network essentially. Now these forks do solve the immediate issue. Certainly Bitcoin Cash has cheaper transaction fees, but they don't address the larger problem. They don't address the governance. What happens when the next challenge comes along? Are we just going to create a fork for every change we have to make to the network? Unless we solve the governance issue, we're not going to be able to have a network that consistently evolves. So how do we solve this? Well, I'm going to talk about Dash. Now, Dash is not the only network that's adopted a governance structure that makes sense, but it was certainly the first. And what we're seeing is a number of new networks and existing networks are starting to model their governance structure on the foundation that Dash has created. And so it's really interesting. So Dash realized early on that in order to have a successful network, you didn't need to have the best technology on day one, but you needed to have a network with the strongest governance structure that allowed that technology to evolve to meet the changing market conditions and needs. Dash realized that strong corporate governance was more important than the technology itself. So how does Dash operate? The Dash network is operated by the Dash Foundation, a corporate entity that promotes and develops the Dash network. They have employees all around the world and also a top-class CEO. This is run like a real company. Now, while Bitcoin gives all of its block reward, now the block reward is the amount of cryptocurrency that's issued every time a block is formed. While Bitcoin gives all of that reward to the miners, the Dash network splits that reward three ways. 45% of that reward still goes to the miners, but 45% also goes to the masternodes, and I'll get to what a masternode is in a second, and 10% goes to funding the Dash Foundation. Dash was the first network to introduce this concept of masternodes. In order to run a masternode, you don't need complicated hardware. In fact, you could run a masternode on a pretty standard desktop computer. What you do need is to own 1,000 Dash. If you own 1,000 Dash, you can stake your Dash to the network. It's a simple process. You don't lose control of your Dash. You just demonstrate to the network that you own it and you haven't spent it. And then you're able to run a Dash masternode. Now, the Dash masternodes are the core of the governance structure on the Dash network. For a change to happen on the Dash network, we see the following procedure. A proposal is put forwards to the masternodes. This is done on blockchain, and that proposal includes a proposed change as well as a budget. And then the masternodes vote on whether that change should be adopted or not. If the vote is passed, then the budget is automatically allocated in Dash from the network itself. And in the case of a network change, the Dash Foundation will start working and rolling out that change immediately. So the really important point to grasp here is in order to run a masternode, you don't have to buy expensive hardware, you have to buy Dash. You have to own 1,000 Dash. And when it comes to voting, if I run a masternode and my investment is in 1,000 Dash, I'm much more incentivized to vote in a way that promotes the adoption, success, and growth of the Dash network than maximizing my own profits, because my investment is tied to the success of the Dash Foundation. Remember, when you're mining, your success is tied to the value of your mining hardware and the profitability of that hardware, which can mine any cryptocurrency, and you can choose whichever is the most profitable. With a Dash masternode, I am intrinsically tied to the Dash network, and I'm always going to vote to promote the success of that network. And that's really, really important to see why that's so powerful for the Dash network. So finally, to pull this all together, we've mentioned the Dash Foundation a few times. Now, the Dash Foundation is a well-funded entity. That 10% of the block reward that goes to the Dash Foundation represents millions of dollars a month. And that goes to not just developing Dash, paying developers to be actively working on the network, but also to market and promote the adoption of Dash. So the Dash Foundation is well funded to spread the adoption, spread the word, spread the marketing of the Dash network itself. Now, while the Dash Foundation is a corporate entity, all of the decisions down to who the CEO is, what the salaries of the developers and the CEO are, as well as what the Dash Foundation focuses and works on, is decided by the masternodes, by those that are most heavily invested in the Dash network itself. One way to think of the masternodes is akin to the masternodes being the board of directors for the Dash Foundation. So putting this into practice, remember that Bitcoin has this scaling issue that they've been working on for a number of years. They don't seem to be able to work out a solution. There's been a number of splits and divides in the community. Well, Dash ran into a similar scaling issue a couple of years ago. So how did they resolve it? Well, a proposal was put forward to the masternodes to increase the block size. The masternodes voted and passed that proposal within 24 hours. And the Dash Foundation worked on the change and rolled it out across the network. This isn't even considered a large change in the history of Dash. It's just part of the Dash evolution. And it goes to show how important that strong governance is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Dash is not the only network to be adopting such a strong governance structure. And we're seeing a number of networks start to mimic and adopt this. So to recap, and the important point I want to get across is that the most successful blockchains and the ones that are going to see that continued success are not the ones that necessarily have the best technology or most features on day one. It's the blockchains with the strongest corporate governance that allows them to constantly evolve, iterate, and adapt to changing market conditions. Essentially, Bitcoin, Ethereum, these networks are frozen in time. They find it very difficult with their current governance structure to make any changes to the network. The blockchains that are ultimately going to be successful are the ones that are able to constantly change and evolve.